So good morning and welcome. I'm Stephanie Clark, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Burlington and to the lovely Green Mountain state of Vermont, even despite the rain, but you're going to get to see a whole variant of our weather over the course of the next few days. And also to the 2018 International Restorative Justice Conference, Global Unity and Healing. We're really, really delighted to have you all here. We have a tremendously full program over the next few days, and we're going to get to it as quick as we can. We do have a couple, of course, preliminary important things to cover this morning. The first, and really I think the most important, is to say thank you. First, to all of you for being here. So whether you traveled 2 miles or over 10,000 miles, we are really deeply appreciative of you coming to spend this time with us. So thank you. I also want to acknowledge our sponsors, because conferences like this don't happen without generous support. So we've had wonderful support from the Johnson Family Foundation, and please give them warm appreciation. Thank you. We also have generous support from the Pennywise Foundation, and please, again, let's show our appreciation. We have some special funding that was provided for scholarships for Vermont residents, and that came from our Attorney General's office and the Attorney General, who is here, TJ Donovan. So please, again, let's show our appreciation. Thank you. And finally, we had tremendous support from the Department of Corrections, and this was to provide funding for both DOC staff and Community Justice Center volunteers statewide to attend the conference. I want to say thank you to the Department of Corrections and also specifically to Derek Miodovnik, who was instrumental in securing that funding for so many to attend. So please, again, let's show our support. So I do have a lot of thank yous. I also want to recognize all of our contributing partners, because again, there's been a lot of time and energy that's been provided by different agencies. So to the contributing partners, and I'm going to list them all. Again, it's the Department of Corrections, the Vermont Attorney General's Office and the Vermont Attorney General, the Vermont Association of Court Diversion Programs, the New York Center for Court Innovation, Vermont Restorative Justice Consortium, the Restorative International Learning Community that is hosted by the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University, the UVM Office of Student and Community Relations, and also the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. Again, let's please show our deep appreciation for all of their help. Now for the people. There are so many people that have really given their time and their energy to help make this possible. And I'm going to do the embarrassing thing that's kind of awkward. I'm going to ask these people to please stand. And I'm also going to ask them then to remain standing. And I'm going to ask you please to hold your applause. And of course, only if you're comfortable, stand. But I want to do that for 2 reasons. One is I want these people to have the recognition they deserve, because they really have just been instrumental in bringing this together. But also I want you to recognize them, because these are the people that will be up here introducing speakers throughout the conference. They're also the friendly face that's going to hand you a microphone if you have a question. They're going to be room hosts. So I want you to know who they are in case you have a question, and if you can't find me, they're going to help you navigate to where you need to be. So if the following people would please stand if you're comfortable. Gail Burford, who I think is already standing. Jennifer Llewellyn, Derek Miodovnik, Willa Farrell, Lisa Ryan, Jill Evans, Gail Champnoise, Lindy Boudreau, Margaret Berry, Susan Cherry, John Kidda, Sarah Robinson, Rebecca Tomford-Hauser, Rob McDougall, Andrea Van Loo, Karen Tronsgaard-Scott, and Bobby Sand. Thank you. Thank you. And just a few notes of real special thanks. First to Gail, because he has been such a link and gentle shepherd in this entire process, and I deeply appreciate his help and guidance. Thank you. And also to Jennifer. She is, she's tremendous, and you're going to hear from her soon. But she was absolutely instrumental in helping with the international curriculum and bringing our international partners here. And I am forever grateful for all of her help and assistance. So please, an extra thanks to Jennifer, too. And some other people who, I know some of them are not going to be at the conference, but they've been helping in some small way in the background, and I want to make sure that they get the recognition. Aaron Webster Chambers, David Thurlow, Heather Hobart, Nicole Zarillo, Samantha Platania, and the entire staff and the catering crew here also at the Davis Center, because they have been a tremendous help. So thank you. I do want to share a quote. And I come really to the restorative justice world with a legal background. And the quote I have today is from Sandra Day O'Connor. "We don't accomplish anything in this world alone. Whatever happens is the result of the whole tapestry of one's life and all the weaving of individual threads from one to another that creates something." So we're all here as individual threads. And we've come together to work towards something, creating a global community of unity and healing. The conference planners have been very intentional in trying to choose multiple themes that are either touched upon or infused in some way with a restorative approach. And my hope is that you discover something that you came here for. Whatever that little tidbit is, or the thing that you wanted to find out, or the thing that you want to be able to take back to whatever work you do, I want you to be able to find that in this conference. But more than that, I really want you to find something new, something outside of what you do every day. Discover something that's different. And my hope is that you'll then see how what you do and that something new actually connect. Because they do. They are connected. And together they become those bigger threads that then will weave into this global unified community. I'll leave you with that. My final duty this morning is really one of joy. I get to introduce the next speaker. I wouldn't be here except for Bobby Sand. So I came to work with the DUI treatment court when he was the state's attorney in Windsor County. And so we had the chance to work together with the Windsor County DUI treatment court. When he left, he became a governor's liaison of alternative criminal traffic something, and none of us ever got the title right. He has always been, throughout this, a professor of law at the Vermont Law School, and he continues as a professor of law at Vermont Law School, but he is also now the director of their new Center for Justice Reform. Please help me say thank you, and also welcome to Bobby Sand.
The view from up here is amazing. You all look great. A little soggy, but great. As Stephanie so graciously indicated, my name is Robert Sand. I am an associate professor at Vermont Law School, the director of the new Center for Justice Reform, with its new master's degree, a Master of Arts in Restorative Justice. We call it the Marge. Now, this might not be the appropriate time or place or venue to promote the new master's degree, so I will not encourage you to talk to Laura, who's at the table right next to the registration desk. But if you decide, nevertheless, that you do want to talk to her about the new program, let me forewarn you, she can be very persuasive. So, as Stephanie mentioned, we would not be here without the generous support of our sponsors and the cooperation and collaboration of many individuals. But let me be very clear about one thing. We absolutely would not be here without the efforts of one individual, a person who is organized and patient, responsible and patient, dedicated and patient, and good-humored. Did I mention patience? Can we all please show our appreciation for the Principal Conference Coordinator, Stephanie Clark? Four years ago, I had an opportunity to offer some welcoming remarks at the Restorative Justice Conference in this same venue on behalf of the law school and then Governor Shumlin. And I suggested then that what I had learned from my 20-plus years as a prosecutor was that we needed a criminal justice system that was strong enough and flexible enough to allow for alternative responses. But I was not prepared to endorse restorative justice as it relates to crimes of interpersonal violence. My thinking on that has changed. Restorative justice is not simply an alternative to use for lesser offenses or lesser harms. It ought not simply to be a diversion from the predominant response. Instead, restorative responses should be the norm, the default, the way we address all harm and conflict, regardless of its nature and severity. This is particularly true in this consequential week, when the United States Supreme Court, at least 5 justices of the United States Supreme Court, have legitimized the condemnation of otherness in a way that is profoundly antithetical to core values in this country. A restorative approach does not preclude incarceration or school suspension or state intervention into family life or other hallmarks of our current dominant system, but a restorative approach yields those ends truly as a final option and only after an expansive process that builds on strengths and connections rather than highlighting and exacerbating differences and weaknesses. And while this may sound like an oxymoron, I think we need to advocate forcefully for more widespread use of restorative practices and principles. If that is inherently contradictory, the forcefully advocating for restorative principles, perhaps we can live with that contradiction. Let me tell you a story about a new perspective. My brother lives outside of Boston. My sister lives outside of DC. I live in southern Vermont. And our mom lives outside New York City in Westchester County. My brother, sister, and I decided that it would be fun to go visit our mom. And rather than stay in a hotel, we thought it'd be fun to rent a house. So I went online to Airbnb and rented a house not too far from my mom. The day came to visit, and we spent the afternoon with mom, had a very nice time, had an early dinner with her, and then my brother, sister, and I left and decided we'd go get a real meal and went to a restaurant. And I was a little frustrated that day because I couldn't get the property owner to send the directions on how to actually get into the house. So we finished up our meal. Finally, I get an email that gives us the code to get into the house. And we drive to the house that we've rented, and there's a lockbox, and I key in the number, open it up, and there's a key, and I hand it to my sister, who is standing by the front door, and she puts the key in the lock. She opens the door, and there's a latch chain that keeps the door from opening all the way, and my sister says, "Rats, I guess we're going to a hotel." And my brother uses slightly saltier language, most of it directed at me because I was the person who had made the arrangements. And I, tired and frustrated, walk up to the front door and with a fairly firm pop of my shoulder, pop the latch, open the door, but in the process damage the door trim. My sister is appalled. My brother bizarrely thinks that it was somehow my credibility went up in his eyes, and I was just tired, so went to bed. The next morning, I, of course, do the right thing, and I email the owner. I say, "Thank you for the use of your lovely home. In the interest of full disclosure, the door was latched, and in opening the door, some of the door trim was damaged." Deliberately using the passive voice and not particularly owning that behavior. In response, he goes ballistic. How dare you do that? You had no right to do that. You had an obligation, responsibility to contact me. How do I know you're not going to destroy my entire home? And I respond, I'm sorry, and of course we can have a discussion about reasonable compensation, but of course you did have a responsibility to provide us access to the home. Not the right thing to have said. So, in response, all caps, don't tell me about responsibility, I'm a lawyer, blah, blah. So I respond, well, I was an elected DA for 15 years, and I'm now a law professor, so blah, blah, blah. We blah-blahed back and forth a few times, and then he said, fine, I'm going to pay for the damage, but I am going to report you to the police. So I then spend the next 36 hours researching New York law on property damage and illegal entry into the home and the terms of the Airbnb contract, trying to figure it out. Did I have a reasonable basis for believing I could do what I did? And if the police come, what police department is that going to be? And am I going to get arrested? Needless to say, it was not particularly present for my mom or my family. And after about 2 days of pretty intense research, something clicks in my brain. And I start thinking about some of the people I had been reading. Kay Pranis and Howard Zehr and Marilyn Armour, and some of the people I've been spending too much time with over the last couple of years, Gail Burford and Derek Miodovnik, John Kidda, Becky Penberthy, Heather Hobart, Willa Farrell, and others. And I take a deep breath. Think, regardless of the legality of what I did I harm this person? The answer to that was yes. And did that harm give rise to some obligations on my part? The answer to that was yes. And did I have a way to make amends? And the answer to that was yes. So when I got home to Vermont, I wrote a check to cover what I thought was the cost of the property damage, and then maybe a little bit more. And I wrote a letter and I said, regardless of the legality of what I did, I caused you harm and I'm sorry. Enclosed, please find a check to repair the door. To the extent that the check exceeds the cost of repair, I hope you'll consider donating the balance to charity. 4 days later, I get an email from the property owner, and he says, thank you so much for your letter. You have restored my faith in humanity. I am so sorry for the way I overreacted. I thought that was the end of things. 45 days later, an envelope arrives, and inside is a check returning 3/4 of the amount of money that I had sent him originally. Now, I recognize that there is some privilege contained within this story. This was an Airbnb rental. I had the means to make financial restitution for a whole host of reasons. I suspect that if the police had arrived, I was not going to get arrested. But what I also know to be true is that thinking about the event in terms of rules and contract and law and leverage and advantage and consequence and punishment only led to more conflict. But once we started thinking about the event in terms of harm and relationships and obligation and amends, that led to healing and perhaps justice. So we have 3 days to immerse ourselves in thinking about healing and justice locally and globally. Have a wonderful conference.
Good morning. My name is Willa Farrell, and I work in the Attorney General's office as the co-chief of the Community Justice Division. and I'm pleased to be able to introduce our next and first, I guess I was going to say our first speaker, but not quite. One of our speakers this morning, our Attorney General, T.J. Donovan. Like many of you, those of you who are here from Vermont, I first knew of TJ as the state's attorney in Chittenden County. That's where we're all today. It's where about a quarter of our state's population lives. TJ was a prosecutor who advocated and led reform of the criminal justice system. He was innovative and willing to do things differently. One example that many of you here are aware of is a program he created to divert people with substance use and mental health needs to treatment. As the state's attorney, TJ embraced restorative justice. During his 10 years as the county's prosecutor, he referred many people to the community-based restorative justice providers in this community. 2 years ago in the fall, I was driving on the highway listening to a radio interview with TJ, then a candidate for AG. And I vividly recalled TJ speaking about the effects of adverse experiences in childhood. He spoke about this trauma as it relates to those of us who brush up against the criminal and youth justice system, those who struggle with addiction, who struggle in life. It's the first, maybe the only time I've heard a candidate for office speak about this reality of bringing that understanding and empathy to our work. I was deeply moved. Now, almost 2 years later, I can attest to how TJ's awareness of the origins of so many social issues informs his commitment to restorative justice in Vermont. Restorative justice is not easy. We're trying to create an opportunity and process for people who've been harmed by crime or other wrongdoing, and those who've caused that harm to come together in a way that promotes understanding of underlying harms and responsibilities, as Bobby's story just illustrated, and of individuals and also of the larger community. This is complex and nuanced work, as you all know. To me, it's also the power and the challenge of restorative justice, and I see TJ actively working with these complexities as the Attorney General. He continues to lead criminal justice reform in this state, and just to name two examples, most recently, he has been working to address issues of fair and impartial policing, and has led, Vermont's recent changes to the cash bail system. These examples, to me, illustrate an effective leader in the policy arena, but what really sticks with me is TJ's genuine interest in people's stories, in their struggles, and TJ's desire to help them be heard and to connect with them on a human level. And I'm sure many of you have already experienced that here this morning. All this is the foundation of our work. Please welcome the Attorney General of the state of Vermont, T.J. Donovan.
Good morning. Willa, thank you for those kind remarks. And Bobby, thank you for your words as well. I would not be in this position doing what I'm able to do without the trailblazers who came before me and continue to do this work, and that's Willa Farrell and Bobby Sand, so thank you. Stephanie, thank you and Vermont Law School for hosting this important conference. And Bobby, I just want to reflect on your story. I certainly appreciate your story, but as an elected official, I have to talk about, make a pitch to our Vermont tourism industry. For those who may be thinking about deciding to vacation or to rent in New York or in Vermont, let me give a simple difference. We don't call the cops on you. Come to Vermont. Come to Vermont. I am so happy to be here to talk about restorative justice, a topic that I firmly believe in and think needs to be expanded in all aspects of our systems and frankly our life. Bobby touched on this earlier. We only need to reflect on just this past week to understand some of the challenges we're facing in this nation. Whether you are talking about the assault on workers' rights by the Supreme Court in the Janus decision. Whether you are talking about the assault on immigration, which is a good thing for our country, whether you talk about the decision in regards to the travel ban being upheld, or you talk about this disastrous and mean policy of family separation. The state of Vermont was proud to sue the Trump administration and stand for justice and to stand for immigration and stand for reunification of families to give children and their parents an opportunity to achieve the American dream, to come to this country. This was the crazy, absolutely. Talk about this family separation policy and zero tolerance. We talk about the title of this conference of unity and healing and what's needed in our national political discourse and our policies. You talk about this zero tolerance policy that if you come in, and we're for border security, everybody's for public safety. It's just how do you arrive there? Folks are coming to this country to seek a better life, to provide opportunity for their children. And we don't ask why they're leaving their countries. And we don't ask about what their dreams are for themselves and for their children when they arrive at this country. And to think that it's a policy of this country on a misdemeanor crime, to separate families, and for parents not to know where their children are, and for children not to know where their parents are, and for children not to know where they are physically are. Think about the trauma being done to these kids. And I know when you look at this great conference and the number of panels, we're going to talk about that issue of trauma, and Willa talked about this. But that conversation has to be part of this larger debate, that we have an obligation to stand up and protect kids, that the Constitution does apply to anybody who touches our borders, regardless of where they're from, and we have an obligation to defend them and to stand up for them and to speak for them when they can't speak for themselves. And that's what we're doing in the state of Vermont with so many other states in this country. This is what this debate is about. And when we have the announcement of the retirement of a Supreme Court justice, we thank him for his service. But this is a big decision. Who's coming next? Talk about civil rights. Talk about women's rights. You know, I get accused, and I do believe in restorative justice, so much so that I don't think the Attorney General's office or any state's attorney or any form of government needs to solve everybody's problem. The community can. And when people are being really mean to me in my office, they call me a libertarian. Because I don't think government has to have a role in solving all our problems. But let me tell you one role government should have no role in. And it's telling or dictating what a woman's choice is in terms of her health. This is going to be a central issue about this Supreme Court nominee. And because I'm an elected official, I get to talk about politics for a second. So when we talk about this, we got to talk about November of 2018. And you can talk about whether you agree or disagree with the current administration, but if you care about protecting people, if you care about making sure that women have a right to make their own decisions, if you care about our environment, then you got to get out and vote in 2018. It's not enough just to say, we disagree, we don't like what we're hearing, we're appalled. This is about hard work. This is about getting out and making sure that you tell your friends, your families to vote, because these issues that we're talking about today and over these next 2 days in Vermont are the central issues that are going to be debated not only in November 2018, but these next 2 years. And if we truly believe in healing and unity and justice and equality, this has to go on after these next 3 days. And I urge you to be involved, to be engaged, and to fight the good fight wherever you're from, whether it's in Vermont or any other state in this great nation. I see my good friend Brooks Macarthur here. Brooks is a defense attorney, grew up in a neighboring town. I've known him for close to 30 years. Brooks and I like to talk about pop culture when we don't talk about the law. I saw Brooks this morning. It made me think about a movie, a terrible movie, that we probably both have seen, and if we talked about it, we'd laugh about it. Terrible movie. It's called Any Given Sunday. I don't know if anybody saw it, but there's a great actor in it. And no, I'm not talking about LL Cool J. He's in it. Al Pacino's in it. Jamie Foxx is in it. And why I was thinking about it, because this morning when I got up and was reviewing my email, I had an email from a 19-year-old kid. And while this is probably Vermont, I truly pride myself on being accessible to everybody, because everybody should have the opportunity to access government and to access our government officials. 19-year-old kid sends me an email, and he talks about his past and whether or not I can help him. But in the email, he tells me some of his story, and he starts talking about how he was in foster care, how he ran away from foster care, how he was in juvenile facilities, not only in this state, but in New Hampshire, and how he ended up in jail. And he's looking for help. 19. Think about those life experiences. And when we reflect upon the purpose of this conference, it's not enough just to simply read those emails and talk to him, but for us to ask the question, where did he come from? What's his background? What happened? Who were his parents? What did the state do or did not do? Because I do believe, as Willa said, that we have to understand this issue of trauma on folks, that we have to understand the impact trauma has over a lifetime of people. And listen, I got to tell you, and Willa knows this, and Bobby knows this, I can't pronounce half the words that you guys are going to use this week or understand half the acronyms that people are going to use to talk about this stuff. But I think I understand people. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. And when you talk about adverse childhood experiences, and I remember, and I don't know if he's here today, Dave Melnick. I don't know if Dave is here today. We were at a training, and he was talking about adverse childhood experiences. And he was talking about the issue of overcoming challenges and the issues of adversity and resiliency. And I'm one of 6 kids. I come from an Irish Catholic family. We know dysfunction pretty well. We do it pretty damn good. And I said, wait a minute. I said, adversity is a good thing. Resiliency and perseverance, those are character builders. That's what we want. He looked at me and he said, Donovan, you don't understand. He said, when you're that kid, and you're growing up in a home and you don't know if you're going to eat, or you watch your mom get beat, or you watch your mother or father be passed out because they're addicted. That's the stress that is so toxic to a young person, that it has those lifelong impacts and creates that path for the rest of their lives. Higher rates of addiction, higher rates of mental illness. Life expectancy less. All in those early years of 0 to 5. And reflecting on that email this morning of this kid, 19 years old, already been in jail, already been in a juvenile facility, reaching out to the Attorney General of the state of Vermont, asking for help to simply be heard. My first reaction was, what is the background? What can we do? Because this kid is fighting. It gets me back, as I saw my friend Brooks Macarthur this morning, to that terrible movie, Any Given Sunday. Well, let me tell you about Any Given Sunday. Any Given Sunday is about a football. It's a football movie. And it's a terrible movie. But there's a great speech in the movie. There's a great speech in the movie by Al Pacino. And Al Pacino talks about that life is a game of inches. That one wrong turn, your life can go in an incredibly different path. One right turn, that bounce of the ball, where are you going to end up? It's a fickle sport, and life is fickle as well. And it's an incredibly great speech, but he talks about the need to fight for something greater than ourselves, to come together as a community, to scratch and to claw and to fight for something. And when you think about that game of inches, the fickleness, that things can go either way based on where you were at 1 minute, 1 second. You made a right turn, you made a left turn, you stood in place, you stood back. It applies to the criminal justice system. Because depending on where you are and where you live is going to dictate your path through our system. And how you're treated in our system is going to dictate your path in life. Let's be honest about it. And that is why we need a new approach that is governed and guided by restorative justice. Because you grow up, and I remember this, and we're at UVM, University of Vermont, great school. There's another great school right down the hill called Champlain College. And I was talking to a bunch of students on a Friday afternoon. And I said, it's a Friday. Some of you are going to go out and commit crimes tonight. We're not going to tell you what crimes, but when I was your age, I was probably thinking about doing the same thing. I said, what's your biggest fear? They kind of looked at each other, shrugged their shoulders, and I don't know, maybe campus security, maybe our RA. So that's fine. I said, why is it if I ask the same question to a group of kids 6 or 7 blocks north of this campus, most of the kids who have a darker complexion than yours, if I ask the same question, why would the response immediately be the police? Depending on where you're from and what you have, all too often dictates the path of your life. And that is the inherent unfairness that creates the inequality in our criminal justice system and in our society. And it can change if we embrace restorative justice. Because when that kid is arrested, then the question is going to be this: what's he going to be charged with? Do the police have a pre-trial or pre-charge diversion program? Can be charged with a felony or a misdemeanor. Who's he going to have for a lawyer? Is he going to have an overworked public defender? Or is he going to have a private attorney who's got the time and the resources, knows how to navigate the system? And then depending on what county they're in or what state are they in, what alternative justice programs are they going to have? Are you going to walk in and be diverted and walk away with no criminal record? Or are you going to walk in and plead guilty, not knowing that that guilty plea will brand you for this foreseeable future and impact your decisions on housing, jobs, and education? And then let's get to the prosecutor. Let me tell you who the most dangerous person in the criminal justice system is, and I've done it. I've been one of them. It's the prosecutor. More specifically, it's that 25-year-old prosecutor with no life experiences. Because the role of the prosecutor at the end of the day is to sit in judgment of other people's mistakes and to pass judgment. My colleague, State's Attorney Paul Finnerty from Lamoille County's here. Paul and I worked together, and Paul used to say one of his hiring criteria was a very, very important question that he'd ask any new prosecutor. You ever been punched in the face? You ever fall down drunk? People look at him. But those are the very issues that prosecutors sit in judgment of. Those are the very issues in the name of public safety we prosecute on. And if you've never been in anybody else's shoes, how can you sit in judgment of anybody else? And then that 25-year-old with no life experiences, and they've gone to college, they've gone to a good law school. They've done everything right. And this is not a knock on them, but it's understanding the difficulty of our system. Because when you get that affidavit, you know nothing about the person. You're looking at criminal histories, which, by the way, and I hope you discuss this, I think some of the most misleading documents in the criminal justice system are criminal records, because they don't address the variables of our systems, of where you're from, who you know, what capital you have or social capital you have to get diverted. But that prosecutor, and I've done this, I started my career in Philadelphia. Still remember, I grew up right down this hill. And Burlington's a nice town. And I remember being in Philadelphia, going to an area that I had never experienced in my life. And Philadelphia was a majority minority city, predominantly African American. And I can remember going to a courthouse to do preliminary hearings in a rough part of Philadelphia at that time. I think it still is. 17th and Montgomery, North Philadelphia. And every single day, I prosecuted young African American men for possession of crack cocaine. And the issue was always, are you going to get state time or county time, because they had mandatory minimums. And every single day, I'd go to this area, and I'd prosecute the same people for the same crime every single day. And finally, walking to the courthouse one day, looked around, didn't see any businesses, didn't see any schools, didn't see any health clinics, didn't see any trees, didn't see any parks. What I saw was graffiti and trash and boarded up buildings with no businesses. And finally, it dawned on me one day doing these cases that if I grew up here, I might be doing the same exact thing as these guys. We are all products of our environment. And let us acknowledge that the starting line is not the same for everybody in life. That community matters, and that inequality is real, and that the criminal justice system for far too often has amplified these inequalities by holding people back, that we have marginalized an entire subset of our population in the name of public safety, mostly the poor, mostly people of color, and that it has to stop. And the path forward is restorative justice. And here's the thing. I'm not sure I could even give you a definition of restorative justice. I think if we went around this room, we'd get about 10 different definitions. But for me, it's about people. It's about caring about folks. It's about believing in the dignity of everybody and believing in the potential of everybody and understanding that life is that game of inches. It matters. It matters where you're from. It matters who's helping you. It matters if the ball's going to bounce your way or somebody can put their thumb on the scale and divert you. But it shouldn't be that way. We should have a system that's community-based, that believes in health. We should have a system where victims, and you talk to victims, and this is my own personal view, what most victims want in our criminal justice system is an acknowledgement of responsibility by the wrongdoer, somebody to take responsibility and say sorry. But we know, because of the way our system's designed, an adversarial system, that far too often doesn't happen. If it happens months, if not years after the fact. But if we embrace restorative justice, you can have that healing. We've all been part of those conversations that are incredibly meaningful for everybody involved. They make a difference. One of the best things I've ever seen is when those conversations happen and at the end, you have the wrongdoer and the victim embracing. People believe in people. People understand folks make mistakes. People believe in second chances. But we have to create that space to create a system of change. We're doing well in Vermont, mostly because of Bobby and Willa and so many others. But we got more work to do. And for the prosecutors, I'm a believer that the most important players in this system are the prosecutors because they control the charge. They control the charge. Are you going to file something? And let's get off this about criminal records, absolutely, but it's also the charge that follows people. And as I say in Philadelphia, when I would charge, I was in a basement room, and all you did was read affidavits all day long and make charges. It was a law school exam every single day. You never understood the people. Think about that for a moment when you talk about our system of justice. A kid from Burlington, Vermont, in a basement windowless room in Philadelphia, not knowing the community resources or assets or lack thereof, but sitting and truly doing that law school exam and saying, okay, this is an element. Well, I got this felony, I can do this felony, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, I've charged some kid with 5 felonies because I could. That's what's got to change. We got to bring this into the community. We got to listen to community members. Yes, it's important that we have good prosecutors and good police officers. They do great work. It's a hard job. But let's focus on the real cases that the criminal justice was designed for, those that truly impact our public safety. That's a small percent. The vast majority, we're dealing with issues of mental illness. We're dealing with the issues of addiction. We're dealing with the issues of poverty. But yet again in our system, you got that prosecutor making a diagnosis of mental illness or addiction with no clinical experience and then prescribing a short jail hit or probation as a way to fix it. It's a failed system. It needs to change. So as I said, I'm not sure I could define restorative justice, but I believe in people. And I believe in a quote by a Persian philosopher by the name of Rumi, who said, beyond right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Thank you.